Hi everyone.
Hi there.
We are recording this video from a new space in Middletown. It's called Free Center. So Free Center provides free access to gathering, exhibition and performance space for individuals and organizations engaged in work that stands to benefits of our community. So we highly recommend you to come and check out the space, and more information you can find on freecenter.us.
So it's a great space, and in this space we have been working on a piece together. It's a collaborative piece, and it's involving electronics, voices, and a very special instrument called domra. I'll hand it back to you, Anna.
Yeah, I can say a few words about this instrument. It is a traditional Russian instrument. It was played mainly by Russian minstrels in the Middle Ages. It has a complicated history. There are almost no images left of this instrument. So we know that in 17th century, father of Peter the Great, Tsar Alexei Mikhailovich, authorized the destruction of this instrument with the Russian Orthodox Church. Russian Orthodox Church and Peter the Great's father, because this instrument was considered pagan. And in the 19th century, Vasily Andreev revived the instrument, and since that time it became kind of a national symbol of Russia.
So it's been a wonderful instrument to work with, and obviously a wonderful player. And the piece is called Reaching Out, and there's all these different elements to the piece that are happening, but what the sort of starting point for it was taking we worked together on finding pitch materials and recordings on domra and certain sounds that maybe weren't used before on domra, or different ways of playing, and so collected all of these recordings, and then I've created this track out of them by processing them, reversing them. And then, with more collaboration, we sort of devised this score to figure out ways of interacting with this track. And so there's a poem, there's the electronic track, and then both of us are performing melodic and pitch materials throughout the piece. And I really hope you enjoy.
Enjoy it.
Beyond it all, that moment, such a small and resting moment, lays there to rest, a touch of radiant silk. And we hold ourselves close, unsuspecting, yet responsible, on invisible but wavering boards of fragmented memories, all but risen. Fear unbecoming into sea otherness, all imperfections noted, brave, made true, whole and kind. It is not through choice that chance is frozen, becoming still, no more breath to reach to me. This stillness of driftwood slaves the moment. Endless path, looking only far, far, far behind. The fear of time becomes black, two-dimensional, sinking whole world. Present and future, only ideas of moment, a paradox of being, time of breath. Reach out beyond arms, mind, and memory. Let go of drift. Think no more of yourself. Let time sit and frozen.
Hello there, my name is Noah Baerman, and I'm happy to be with you today. I've been directing the Wesleyan Jazz Ensemble since 2007, which has been a great privilege, and through that, I've established a lot of really meaningful relationships, and a lot of those relationships will intersect with the music I'm going to be playing for you today. That music comes from a new project of mine, or newly released project of mine called Love Right, a double album that will release on October 9th. I'm going to preview some of that music. I'm going to talk about it. More specifically, I'm going to talk about the idea of vulnerability in music and how that coincides with the content on this project. So content warning, grief and domestic violence. One of the relationships that I established through my time here was with a young woman named Claire Randall, who graduated in 2012. She was a wonderful singer, and I taught her for a while she was here. And then we became close friends, subsequently frequent collaborators. She appeared on a couple of important projects of mine. And she was also a charter team member of Resonant Motion, the nonprofit that I founded in 2012. And it's a happy beginning to the story, but in late 2016, I got the call from another former student that Claire's father had murdered her, murder-suicide. And I won't get into all of those details, but as you can imagine, I was pretty devastated by that. And I really didn't think that I would create music. Not only did I not think I would create music about that grief, but really of any kind for a while. I just figured I would be too gutted to be able to tap into those resources. And interestingly, music started coming to me, starting less than a month after that. My first experience was a dream where I saw Claire, and when I woke up, I thought about how being able to be with her in that context was beautiful and at the same time cruel. And the image of beautiful and cruel created a flood of sounds and words, and I basically sat down and wrote the song, or essentially transcribed the song that came to me all at once. And soon after that, I started thinking about songs because Claire was going to have a memorial, Planet Claire it was called, really beautiful event, and I was asked to perform something, so I wanted to come up with something new. And I wrote a couple of pieces that will also appear on this album that were personal and vulnerable in a way that was not going to be appropriate for that event. They were just too raw, too much about me, about my emotions surrounding it, and about my relationship with Claire. So those tunes, Blueprint was the first I came up with, followed by one called Cheese Time. And I subsequently recorded both of these, but they weren't really appropriate for that event. So my third attempt at a song for Planet Claire was an instrumental piece called Love Right, which is the foundation of this album. And it actually had words. So I used that as a foundation for coming up with some of the melodies. Simple statement, if you love right, you've done right. Reflecting on her life and her legacy. She was a social activist and an incredibly generous, supportive human being. And there were other words, which we'll talk about that in a moment, but that gave me some basis for what I was coming up with melodically and energetically. And when I completed the tune, as is generally true with me, if I have a very strong emotional sense of what a piece of music is supposed to be, what it's supposed to represent, what it's supposed to evoke, there's still effort and there's still decision making that go into creating it, but on some level, I feel like I'm excavating it, and I know when it's done because the emotion I experience hearing it or performing it is congruent with the emotion that I meant for it to express. And it was actually very difficult practicing this tune in preparation for that because the emotions were so intense that every time I played it, I felt like that was coming out. And so I'd like you to hear a bit of Love Right. This is the main portion of it. There's an introduction played by Chris Dingman, Wesleyan class of 2002. The rest of the ensemble here is Amanda Monaco on guitar, Ike Sturm on bass, and Jake Goldbass on drums. I'm playing electric piano here. So here is Love Right. So from one standpoint, this is an extremely vulnerable work, given the emotions that led to creating it, the emotions that I felt when performing it, the associations with Claire, the associations with the extremely emotional event at which I debuted the piece. And at the same time, by the very nature of instrumental work, there's a layer of abstraction. So if you want to look at it this way, some of this vulnerability was protected from public view through the fact that I wasn't vocalizing or verbalizing those sentiments. This song is towards the end of the album, although I decided, going full on into the realm of vulnerability, to open the album with an a cappella arrangement of the piece where the words are actually sung, which was not my intention initially, and sung by several of Claire's fellow Wesleyan students and people with whom she performed often.
Precious fleeting like a grain of sand. Don't you let it slip on through your hands. In the end, it's only love that stands the test of time for all. If you love right, you've done right. If you love right, you've done right. If you love right.
So about a year after Planet Claire, my wife, Kate Tenike, who is on the art faculty here at Wesleyan, and I took a trip to the American Southwest. And one of the places we went was Mesa Verde National Park in Colorado. While we were there, I was interested in checking out the cliff dwellings there, and the only way you could do that was going on a tour. And I thought that might be cheesy, but figured if that was the way we could see Cliff Palace, then it was worth it. So what I did not expect was that the tour guide, a ranger named Michael Piper, would actually give an inspiring sermon, for lack of a better word, on not only the construction of Cliff Palace, but on how the Pueblo people in the 1200s worked together, various sub-communities within that, dealt with the adversity of the conditions and the challenge of that task. And when I thought about that, aside from being visually stunned by this and aesthetically stunned, thinking about how complex it is when you are working with community to get through adversity and how there's triumphs and struggles along with that. And it started to pull conceptually some of the things together for what was crystallizing into this Love Right project as a broader entity. And I started hearing sounds. Like the next day, not only was I still emotionally taken by this, but as we were hiking, I started to hear sounds of some of the thematic material that would become the suite Cliff Palace, which is one of the focal points of the Love Right project. And as these ideas bounced around, I submitted an application to the Guilford Performing Arts Festival in Guilford, Connecticut, and won their Artist Award for Music for that year, which gave me the opportunity to develop and premiere that suite. And so I'm going to play you an excerpt from part of it. It's a multi-movement, uninterrupted suite. And part of what you're going to hear here is some of the thematic material that started buzzing around my head after we visited Cliff Palace. So the personnel here, we've got Chris Allen on saxophone, alto saxophone, Nadia Nordhaus on trumpet, Henry Lugo on bass, the aforementioned Kate Tenike on euphonium, and Tyshawn Sori on drums, who's both an alum of Wesleyan's composition graduate program and a former faculty member here. So the vulnerability represented there, again, revolves around emotional content. Unlike Love Right, there were no words represented, but this extremely vivid emotional sense of what was represented by shared community struggle through adversity was in my consciousness through the whole process, including performing it. Meanwhile, the bulk of the material, aside from those two pieces, has vocals for the Love Right recording project. And there were a few cover songs, as you call them, pieces that I didn't write, and then a lot of things that I did write. And there are various ways in which there could still be some kind of cloak to protect me from the sheer level of vulnerability that could be represented based on the emotions and based on the addition of vocals. So, for example, there's a piece called Lilacs that's more philosophical in nature. So the underlying force of it is emotionally intense, but I'm talking more about Buddhist-inspired reflections as opposed to personal raw emotion. There is a piece called I'm Still Here, a short vignette that has words, but I chose, unlike the vocal version of Love Right, I chose not to have those words sung, and they're sung by a former employee of Wesleyan, Persephone Hall, wordlessly. And then there are two pieces that were written by somebody else, in both cases Claire's sister Molly Randall, and she contributed the words to the pieces Dream Without Me and Sanctuary. And so those were emotionally intense, but they weren't my expressions of emotion. And so again, the vulnerability was kept somewhat at bay. I mean, obviously there's plenty of vulnerability in all of this. And then another way that I did this, there's one very emotionally raw lyric, but I decided to write it in French. And so so the piece is called Sans Toi, Sans Toi. And if you want to reach out and ask me for a translation, you can. So I'm going to play you a little bit of that. This features a pretty large ensemble. Michael Pestel on flutes and recorders. Gina Ulysse is the singer, who for years was an anthropology professor at Wesleyan, but who's also a performance artist. And I was thinking of her as I wrote this song, thinking of her singing it, having heard her incorporate Haitian voodoo chants and into some of her performance art. On saxophones, we have Matt McLean and Wesleyan alum Spencer Hattendorf. Kate Tenike is on euphonium yet again. Sam Dickey, an alum of the ethnomusicology program at Wesleyan, is on guitar. Professor Jay Hogard is on marimba. And Jocelyn Pleasant, a current ethnomusicology doctoral candidate, is on drums and percussion. And I'm playing bass on this one. So here's Sans Toi, Sans Toi.
Chaque jour est
So I've talked a bit here about cloaking the emotions, cloaking the vulnerability through one means or another. And most of that wasn't conscious. Most of that was just letting the music organically be what it needed to be, and still plenty emotional. It's just not 90 minutes of uninterrupted primal screaming. And part of that was that I wanted there to be an emotional arc. And just as in any narrative, whether it's a piece of music or a film, to deliver something really emotional, the rawest of emotions can't be at the forefront every moment for an extended period of time and still have it be a digestible narrative. And at the same time, there were moments that I did want or need to be particularly raw. And that was what was genuine and organic to the music and to those emotions. And it was something that I wanted to have represented, in part because musically that's something I particularly relate to, whether it's John Coltrane's A Love Supreme or the work of Muddy Waters or great Black gospel music, that kind of reduced inhibition and sort of giving yourself over to the emotion of what's being expressed is central to why I even care about, much less create music. And so some of the pieces on Love Right represent that in different ways, through the rawness of the performance, through styles that are less polished, through less emphasis on virtuosity. Most of the things that I have recorded in my professional life have been jazz, and in most cases instrumental jazz, and there's a certain focus on virtuosity. And so some of the stuff on here, it just didn't lend itself to being chopsy. And there's a certain vulnerability there too, you know, even if I'm doing something that sounds that is very emotional, if it sounds polished to a certain degree, then at least there's, you know, you can focus on the fact that I can kind of get around the piano a bit. Whereas on some of these, I played instruments on which I don't have virtuosity. The one you're going to hear next, I play guitar, and I don't really have guitar chops. And so it was more of a spotlight on the emotion. And as these things came to me, I felt a need to sort of obey. And there's a couple levels of obedience to what's happening in the spirit of the music that came into play in this project, and that to a certain extent come into play in my work in general. One was having emotions come that are, and musical ideas that come that are sort of involuntary, and, you know, where I just channel something. I've mentioned that before with the first song that I wrote for this project, not knowing that it would be a project. There was a piece that I wrote or transcribed from the universe called I'm Going Home, that literally came to me, or the crux of it, the main thematic and musical material came to me as I was driving away from Claire's memorial. And I didn't really know what it meant, and I'm not 100% sure still what it means on a phrase-by-phrase basis, although it's fairly straightforwardly a song of grief and pleading. And at a certain point, though, I feel like I was gifted with this song, with the basis of this song, and I felt the need to obey that. You know, I could nitpick aspects of it and fine-tune aspects of it, but I've learned that when I get a gift like that, I need to take that pretty seriously, and I need to be somewhat faithful to that. And then there's another level of obedience where once that song has become a fully integral entity, then in the case of the Love Right project, I felt the need to share it. I felt the need to use it rather than say, okay, well, that's nice that happened, and I'm going to put it in this box over here. If things were coming to me that were that emotionally potent to me, even if in the moment I felt the need to include them, even if some of the emotions were uncomfortable. I mean, not that any of the emotions were comfortable on this project. So this is that song. It's called I'm Going Home. I play guitar on this. It's sung by Garth Taylor, Wesleyan alum. And it includes Sam Friedman, another Wesleyan alum, on harmonica. Both Sam and Garth were friends and collaborators of Claire's as well. The bass is played by Mike Pope, and the organ is played by Kwaku Darko, who was my student at the Center for Creative Youth, CCY, a couple of years ago, or just last year, actually. And so he's got Wesleyan relevance there, too. So here's an excerpt from I'm Going Home.
Don't know where you went, I just know it's far. So I'm trying to set my radar to where you are. And I know I'm going home. Yes, I know I'm going home. I'll see you again. Is more than I can handle, so it's not if but when. And I know I'm going home. Yes, I know I'm going home. Can't sleep or eat or drink as I look for you to kingdom come. Get my mind to think, Lord, if there's peace, let me please have some. I'll take my grief, throw it on the pile. On top of all the anger, numbness and denial, and I know I'm going home. Yes, I know I'm going home. Until I have you next to me. My soul will keep on wandering
So thank you for being with me in this time and for being open to this way of looking at things, which is sometimes very challenging. And I want to make it clear in conclusion that I'm not proselytizing for this. I'm not saying that emotionally vulnerable music is the most potent or the most relevant or the most important thing or the most valid. It's relevant for some of us and less so for some of us. But I want to plant the seed that these are some ways of thinking about it and interacting with one's own vulnerability when creating music. And so for any of you for whom this is relevant, or for any of you who are maybe looking for permission to go to those places, hopefully this provides a little bit of that. Thank you very much. And again, Love Right coming out on October 9th. You can be on the lookout for that if you're interested. Thank you.